Hello everyone, my name is Joanne Lockwood and I am your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. That's S-E-E, changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 66, with the title Unhiding Oneself at Work. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome Kat Kimmin. Kat describes himself as someone who teaches people to write job postings to remove bias and get the right people to apply. When I asked Kat to describe their superpower, they said that they never forget a face and they ask great questions. Hello, Kat. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe.
It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. We've never met in person, I don't think, but we've chatted a bit online. We've done a few webinars together, and I've been really looking forward to just having a chat with no other agenda than having a chat for a podcast. So really great. So, Kat, we were talking just now about hiding and unhiding oneself at work. So what does that mean to you?
You know, it's interesting. I spend so much time talking about job postings, but on the other side of a job posting is somebody who has to live with their job, right? And I think about this from two perspectives, the side of me that had to exist in corporate America and the side of me that exists now as an entrepreneur and someone who's traveling the country. And honestly, I spent most of my life hiding, having this deep knowing of myself, whether it was coming out as a lesbian many years ago or realizing that I was trans later in life, and being able to put words to a feeling I always had. I don't want anyone to think I was like reading a book one day. I was like, oh, interesting. That could be that. Like, this is definitely something that all of the signs were there, but I never had language for it because I grew up in a military family. And so, military family, it was against the rules to be gay. Trans was not even a conversation. And that put me and really conditioned me to believe that there were going to be two versions of myself, that I would get to go to work and be one person, and I wouldn't have to talk about my personal life. I could just hide all my personal things and then go home at night and be whatever I wanted to be, and then show up the next day and be the best person at work and the best person at home. And the truth is that if there's a gap between who you think you are at work and who you think you are at home, there's often a gap in success too. You're never going to be the best in your career if you're pretending to be something else. And I did that. And I will never forget my very first corporate job and having someone ask me about a date I had that night. And I said I was going on a date with someone named Stacy. And they immediately said, "Oh, who is he? What he's like? What is he like?" And it made it so obvious to me that whether they had an issue with me being gay or not, they assumed I wasn't and that I shouldn't be. And from that day forward, it kind of put this lens on my mind that I had to pretend until I knew it was safe. Fast forward many moons later, and I couldn't hide anymore. I cut off my long curly hair. I had curls down to my shoulders. I wore pink shirts. I did everything to fit in because I cared more about my career than being who I was. And when I started my own business, I realized that I couldn't keep pretending about who I was being and still create connection. I'm a writer. I want to connect with people. I want to tell stories. That's what I love about the work I get to do every day. And yes, job postings are stories. They're not just junk content for the internet. And the more I told the story, the more I realized how much it enabled the success of my business. It enabled the success that I wanted, which was really just to feel like I mattered. You know, I think that's what we all want. I think we all worry if we're doing it right, if who we are is enough to get what we need out of life. And ultimately, I think that in hiding myself, it created a very good business case in my mind that who I am doesn't matter, and that's not real or true. And I've spent what had us running into each other is that I feel like I've come out over and over again, but I've also talked a lot about being out at work. I say all of this with great privilege, right? The privilege of running my own business. So there's no boss to fire me for being trans. I write the policy. I decide how this is going down. I can fire someone for misgendering me if I want to. Like, I have all the power in the world, but that's also opened my eyes to the great privilege that is, and what it feels like for other people. And so that's been kind of the addition to my business, the new thing that I've done. Because for so much of my career, I didn't want to be the gay person. I wanted to be good. And now I acknowledge that I can be good, and I can be good in everything that I am. And that's really, I think, probably what brought me to this conversation with you.
Awesome. I'm just listening to you there. There's so much you were saying there that is so relatable and yeah, so insightful. And can I just pick up on you said you're traveling the country?
Mhm.
Um, I know, I've seen some of your postings on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just explain what do you mean by traveling the country? How did that start?
I was gonna say, people are like, you think I like went for a trip. No, I took on a much bigger journey. So the backstory behind it is that my mom got really sick a few years ago. She has rheumatoid arthritis. She was in the military for 25 years, retired, saved up every single day off. I remember she had 6 months of vacation days when she retired. She retired 6 months early because she had never once taken time. And within 2 years, she was 100% disabled. Her rheumatoid arthritis makes your bones very sharp and brittle. And what happened is she was pulling up her sheets one night and ripped every single tendon in both of her hands. And I realized that we can save every penny, every minute, and it will not change our ability to enjoy it at the end. There's no right time to live your life. Now is the only answer. And I had lived my whole life with this rigor around this, then that, this, this working and then this living. And I realized that they both have to happen at the same time. And in the years of therapy and coaching and everything else it took to convince me that I was actually allowed to do this, because, this is like breaking a lot of rules. I bought a van, I converted it into an RV, and I've been traveling the country for the last year, running my business, speaking, training, teaching people how to write job postings from everywhere in the country, because remote means remote. You can live anywhere. And I've done it.
It just means an internet connection from somewhere, doesn't it? Over 3G, 5G, satellite. If you can hook up to the net, then you're in, aren't you?
Yeah, but on the same hand, and I know you know this feeling, right? It also means I experience a lot of different places. And it's another dimension of learning how to live out loud, because I can't just hide in my apartment. And you don't even realize how much you hide in your apartment until you can't hide in your apartment. Or I guess you can, but there's wheels and windows and you have to move it every once in a while. The fridge isn't very big. You won't last long if you're hungry.
You have to go shopping eventually, and you can't get an easy delivery because they're not sure where you'll be.
You get any delivery. You do not have an address.
No, second tree past the water tap or something.
You learn a lot of things that you can't do without an address, which is a whole
Yeah,
other dimension of just realization. And again, like, you have to live presently and with people.
yeah.
There's not a lot of separation you can do in this lifestyle.
When we were chatting before we went live, you were talking about your realization of need for an anchor point or something to hang on to, that because you're traveling, you're mobile, you're moving around, you're constantly changing your location, stability's not there. You realize combining that with your gender transition or gender identity, the flux of that, you found that this your psychological safety, your mental health is being impacted by not having this kind of anchor, this crampon on the side of the mountain you can hang on to.
I think it's twofold, right? It's the burnout that comes from constant decision making, not just for physical well-being. Do I have food? Do I have water? But this second dimension of, am I safe here? Which you don't have to do when you're going from your house to a store and back, and you can go to the bathroom before you leave. You can, you know, wait until you get home, right? There are just a lot of different decisions that I didn't have to make before. And it didn't really hit me until I went to somewhere where people don't give you weird looks. And so I was just outside of New York City, and I caught myself running out of a bathroom. I was washing my hands and I heard someone flush, and I caught myself like slamming the sink and trying to like dry my hands very quickly and run. And the person didn't react to me at all. And what I realized is that it's the exhaustion of fear over time. And I can't even imagine what it's like for trans people who are worried about what their employer is seeing. They're worried about their job stability. They're worried about coming out to other people, how that might feel. Because as much as I know that I've experienced this over time, we don't think about it a lot, and we
Mm.
don't think about what it means when your survival is on the line, not just to go to the bathroom and not just for like literal survival, but your survival and your paycheck, right? The things that help you survive every day.
For people living, say, in the UK, and we think we got it pretty tough as trans people here, just can you explain? Because you're living in the US. If you don't mind me saying, you're trans masculine non-binary, assigned female at birth, and your identification, your ID, driving license, passport, social security, all these is currently still in your assigned female at birth name.
Yeah.
So you're saying to me before we went live about the risk you have of being in the wrong space is that you could be arrested, or worse, you could be experience violence by people trying to evict you, or take law into their own hands. So that's something we don't really have in the UK. I know people are frightened sometimes and they're cautious about bathrooms, but not to the extent you described, I don't think.
Yeah, I personally have been pulled out of bathrooms by bouncers. I have had people's husbands wait outside of the bathroom. And I know people who, and I've read enough headlines to add fear, add fuel to the fear of people who were literally beaten up outside of bathrooms because they thought there was a air quotes a guy going in the girls' bathroom, as if. And the joke I make, even though it's not funny, is, do you have a men's and a women's restroom in your house? Like, are you just the fanciest person in the world that you have a fancy potty for everyone at your house? Because
Mm.
that's how I live, and I don't know what you think's what you think's about to happen, but it is this constant questioning in my mind of just wondering if I'm going to be okay, and that question alone is enough to make me never want to be outside at all.
Mm. I can relate to that. It's even though my life is so much simpler now than I've transitioned. You talked about earlier about having this gap between one person and the other person, this duality of life where you're having to cover, mask, hide part of your identity, and that double thinking you have to do with every conversation. I've exchanged that simplicity of thinking, that simplicity of life, for another complication where I'm always got one eye, one ear on that threat. Maybe as humans, we've always had this fight, flight, or freeze part of our bodies. That's always sometimes that adrenaline's kicking in, that hyper awareness to threat is now there, which inherently causes our stress levels to rise, means we're probably doing damage to our health by being in that constant state of anxiety. But I, to a certain extent, I don't feel the threat of violence or the threat of being arrested. I'm more worried about a flashpoint, someone screaming or pointing the finger or making a big deal of it. So I try to minimize myself, try to sneak in, sneak out without looking sneaky, if that makes sense. You don't want to
Mhm.
appear shifty by by being too careful, do you? So you've got to smile, you've got to interact, you got to sort of be the person who they're expecting you to be in the bathroom. So that must be really complex as someone who, you have a deep voice. You've been on T for a while, testosterone for a while, so you don't have your birth voice anymore. So that must be really hyper aware, because you've got to a blend in a female restroom, yet you don't present in a very. I hope you don't mind me saying so. You don't look very feminine, which I hope is a
Yeah,
compliment.
like, thank you. Right? Like,
I hope it's
that's
a
what
compliment.
feels good to me.
Yeah,
That's how I like to live my life. This is the first time in my
yeah,
entire life I've looked in the mirror and not hated the person on the other side.
yeah.
And I also was socialized as a female for my entire life, which means
Mm,
I was taught to not make too much noise, to be pleasant, to be kind, to be gentle and loving, and all of these things. And it's fascinating to wander the expectations of others based on how they see me. And I never once realized it until this period of my life. So when I had the long curly hair and everything, I fit right in. I got it. I played the part. They got me. No one could spot me, you know? Then the next phase of my life, I cut my hair off, and people started, but I still had a very high pitched voice, big smile, my face looked different. There are a million different dimensions, right? And when I started my transition, what was fascinating to me is when I pass. When I
mm,
pass the mail, people treat me differently. I remember the first time it happened while I was traveling in van life. So, like you mentioned, I in December, and this is something I'm open about. I've been on testosterone for 2 years as of December, and the first time I passed was when I was in van life, and I remember because people were being so nice to me, and I was like, "Why are people being so helpful?" I'm talking like it was like the seas parted when I walked down things, and people are holding doors, and then they were like, "Thanks, sir." And I realized it was white male privilege I was experiencing for the first time in my life.
mm,
And so I think there's just all these complicated perceptions that play into it too, of gender and socialization. And then when you experience it, what the other side has, and and the realization when they realize that you're not what they thought you were, and what happens to someone's brains when their expectations get rattled, right? There's just so many pieces. And even without knowing what's happening in their mind exactly, it's always happening in my mind.
mm. This whole social contract of gender and our gender roles, how we behave to each other, is so complex. And the hardest bit I found transitioning myself was having to unlearn, as you mentioned, having to unlearn all these things you've been given, the expectations. And it's not like when you're growing up, because when you're growing up, you're learning, you're not unlearning. But in this post-transitional, during transition, you've got to try and forget all these habits, all these traits you have to relearn. But you think, but why do I have to play this game? Because, well, actually, it's because you want to fit in, you want to be part of society, you want to be accepted as who you are in your head. Therefore, you've got to play the social construct of gender in the other way around. And it can be quite I'm going to say the word fuck. It's a mind fuck, isn't it? It really does mess with your head. And just like you, when you said someone called you sir, it's extremely validating when someone holds the door open, or they carry your bag up the stairs, or say you first, or sorry madam, didn't mean to butt in front of you, or just something like that. You go, oh wow, thank you so much. You actually seen me, you've seen me, the inside me. And I think, wow, it is so magical when that happens, isn't it?
Yeah. And when you said the part about fitting in, I think that's something that I have a unique experience with that for a lot of dimensions. But I mentioned I was an army brat when I was a kid. I moved 13 times before I graduated high school. I am a professional fit inner. Like that was literally I had to do that to survive as a kid. And so coming out is further complicated by this belief that I have to be liked by everyone and that I have to fit into these environments. And when the truth is, like, We don't have to belong everywhere, but in the spaces that we choose to belong, like we have to live out loud. And I think that's the hardest part when you, again, no matter who you are, I think we are conditioned not to stand out. We're told to fit in. That's that capitalism benefits off of us believing the same things that everyone else does, but that system hates us. And so it's almost like a rejection of that system to say, I don't have to belong everywhere. I want to belong in spaces where I'm loved
Mm.
and embraced and celebrated.
Yeah, celebrated. That's a great word. Embraced and celebrated for who we are,
Yes.
not for who we're not. And that's where the magic happens, isn't it?
For not pretending anymore, right? I think the people that I feel the most understood by in my life are the people who acknowledge that I spent my whole life pretending to be something. I will never forget being I couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old looking in the mirror and saying, I am an ugly girl. I'm such a cute boy, but I am an ugly girl. And only having that and like being a teenager is hard enough. You add in this layer of like, but I'm not the thing I'm supposed to be, and I don't even look like what I think I'm supposed to look like. And there's just so many layers that if you make it here, where you and I are sitting to be able to live out loud, where so many people today, I think because of the people who came before us, have the opportunity to live out loud, like we are badass motherfuckers. Like we did not land here by accident.
Mm.
And that's why I will choose to live out loud. That's why I choose to talk about my experience, even though sometimes I have those moments like, this is a little too much. Like, I'm still working it out in my brain, but I'm willing to admit that I'm still working it out in my brain because it means that someone else might think, but might know they have permission to actually live.
Mm. It's interesting you talk about that puberty and trying to come to terms with that you back then. I don't know about you, but I found at the age of 49, having another puberty in a different direction was also a tricky experience, not just for me, but for my wife, for people around me. I was there in short dresses, my boobs out, going clubbing and partying like it was 1999. And I'm like, my wife's going, hang on a minute, you're nearly 50. What are you playing at? You're not 19 anymore. But you got to go through that second puberty in the same way you went through the first one to discover who you are again. Who am I? I've got to break all those rules and rebuild this identity as who I am now. And does T do that? Does testosterone do that to you? Does it?
Oh
Go,
my God.
I want to.
Live in a van. Joe, this was not the plan. I know you look at me and you see the masculinity, but seriously, if you asked me 2 years ago, do you want to go camping? I would laugh in your face. I would laugh in your face. And now I lived outside for like weeks at a time. You know, I I almost think we call it puberty, and it does feel like puberty in many of the hormonal ways. But on the other side, it's this rediscovery of what you like without the rules of gender trying to confine and box you in. I
Hmm.
and to like love things that many people see as inherently masculine and to not take any shit about it or to adapt or conform because of your safety and a million other reasons that we adapt to this world.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. And you're right. It is once you take those constraints off of you, and you realize that the world is just full of bullshit, and it's about forcing you to comply to fit into the government and the structure. You get in line, get in the queue, to control kind of the masses to behave as they should behave, so that people are kind of malleable within society. Once you realize you can change the fundamental identity of who you are, the rules in the whole of life are up for grabs. I'm not saying I want to be anarchic or oppose the government or the infrastructure, but I now know I can now see them for what they are. We can use the matrix analysis to film and how we live in this world of control by people, and how we can actually sort of step back and go, yeah, I see what this all is now. This is just an invention by humanity, and I don't have to play that game anymore.
The rules aren't real. You know, I'll never forget. I think it was a coaching session, and I said something, and she was just like, "Is that real? Who made up the rule? And if you can't name them, it's made up." You know, and I actually can't name any rules, right? Like, unless you're reading, like, a Commonwealth guideline or, the law, those are made up by someone who will hold you accountable for that, but not many of those guide your joy. Not many of those regulate your dreams, and what feels good to you. I was actually just on a presentation and teaching about pronouns, and I was explaining that it's like a resonance. Like when you hear a gong go off and it has this note, and for some people that's beautiful, and for other people they hate it. And that resonance is what I've discovered in this. And that joy has resonance in my life. And when I hit those spots, I can feel that vibration of goodness. And for so long, I just went off of everyone else's roadmap, like, that sounds good to me, sounds good to me, sounds good to me. And for the first time in my life, I've been like, no, no, hell no. I will not wear that dress to your wedding. And I'm gonna live like this. And yes, many people before I set my own boundaries, yes, I would wear dresses as and be people's bridesmaids, long, flowy purple dress. That's all I'm gonna say. Like, but
Yeah.
we do.
Uh,
We say yes. We just say yes because of some rules, and then we're like, wait a
yeah.
minute.
Expectations. It's I left school. I joined the Royal Air Force in the UK. I did that for a few years. I had to earn money. I had to have accommodation. Then I wanted to get married. Then I wanted to have children. And I had to pay for the house, pay for the children, pay for school, pay for college, pay for everything else. And suddenly you're on this conveyor belt, and you think, "How did I get here? I'm not unhappy." And I would never say my life was unhappy, but I didn't know I could be happier, that I was missing something. I didn't realize what that, as you put it, the gap was between where I was and where I had to be or needed to be. And
Yeah,
it's really interesting what you say there. And when you say about this resonance of the right pronouns, it is unsolicited correct gendering is such a validation. And someone says madam, sir instead of sir, they say she, they call me love or something like that. All of a sudden, every time I hear it, it's like, oh, wow. And because you're almost pause for the bracing of the wrong gender coming out. You're almost like rigid with going, you're going to get this wrong. You're going to, oh, you didn't. Oh, wow. Thank you. Oh, that's amazing. Thank you. And I love that resonance of it being perfectly for you. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I think that allows us space because our fear costs us a lot, you know?
Mm,
Being scared constantly, washing your hands and running out, or standing in the stall a little too long, waiting for everybody to leave. Those minutes, they seem minute, and they are in the big picture of how we live our lives. But the cost is the resonance of fear.
mm,
It's the vibration of it. It's the belief that we shouldn't be here, and that's not good for us. That's why I love learning from Alok, Alok, and I will not
mm,
begin to pronounce their last name because I will butcher it. But they start with love. And I think that's most trans people don't get to start from a place of love because we start from the rules. We start from the what everyone told us to be, when in truth we should just start from if we truly love, like deeply loved ourselves, and knew and could assume safely that every person around us was a good, decent, kind, and loving being, how much better our lives would be.
mm,
How much better our experience would be, simply because we're not constantly trying to make ourselves fit into something that does not leave that lingering good feeling.
mm. You said earlier about in your earlier stages in life, you felt like you needed permission to be queer, permission to be trans, permission to travel, permission to step outside of your box. And I would maybe even suggest permission to start a business and have a voice. So, how did you kind of challenge that, limiting belief, imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
That you needed someone's validation to take a step forward. How did you overcome that?
I will admit, probably not in the healthiest ways, and I think it was because I required the permission because I had an attachment to money and being good. So for me, you said, I had to get the money to pay for the house, to do the thing, right? I thought all of my dreams relied on me being good at work. And so I wanted to be good more than I wanted to be anything else. And I think what I came to is that being good isn't enough for me, you know? Like being good at work, just to be clear, like not just like being good high level, but I mean like being good at a job is not the life legacy that I want to leave. Like I don't want to be like Kat Kibben, best marketer ever. God, I just love the writing. Woo! I want to actually live a life where I connect with people and I feel like I'm part of their life and they're part of mine so I think what it was giving myself permission that if something didn't turn out, if the work didn't turn out, it wasn't because of who I am. It's because the work and who I am are two separate things. And so
Mm.
I think that's what really led me to this place where I was like, it can be an and, not an or situation.
Mm.
It's harder than it
Yeah.
sounds. It's, we both, I know, based on the look on your face right now that other people can't see, but I know that we all know that feeling of feeling like it's a choice.
Mm.
There's some choice between being who we are and fill in the blank. And mostly it's your
Mm.
dream. And
There's a saying, isn't it? Everything you ever desire is on the other side of fear. And it's about being able to take that one step forward, realizing if you step off the edge, it's a curb, not a cliff. And people are there, that people have got your back. People want you to win. People want you to succeed. But until you've taken that step, you don't know the parachute is there, the support's going to be there. And often what we talk about here is there's no easy way back, is there? Once you've made these kind of you're out and open, you've changed people's perception of you forever, and you can't go back in the box. So that's the real bravery step. I hate it when people call me brave because you're not brave at the time. You're scared at the time. You're worried. Everything's going on in your head. It's only when you look back over your shoulder 6 years later, you go, oh, maybe I was a bit brave or foolish or foolhardy.
yeah, I actually, that reminds me because when I came out as trans, that's the thing that everyone said, oh, you're so brave. You're so brave. And I didn't want to. I, I So I wrote this post because I went to the doctor for my affirming care and I had to change providers in because I had gotten insurance, etc. Long story short, I go to my doctor and they prescribed the wrong dose. So the needles are different sizes. There's two ways to dose testosterone and the needles are two different sizes. I'll just leave it at that, not to go into a whole medical thing. And they kept giving me needles that were too big. And so I literally would have like been poking my insides. Like I could have ended up with sepsis or something really bad happening to me. And I got so mad, but I also realized that like the time to sit around and be mad was a privilege in itself. That there are kids out there who want gender affirming care who don't have 6 hours to sit in a Walgreens, who can't argue with a doctor, who don't and I felt for almost like I had to come out because I was so mad that I needed other people to know that this was not acceptable. And now and everyone's like, "Meow." They're all like, "That's so brave and very," and I'm like, "No, I was just real mad." I was really
Yeah.
mad, really scared.
And
And
I
it's
concur what you're saying about we sitting here today have privilege. You have what I would appear to say is good mental health, good source of income. Yes, you've got issues. I've got issues. We've all got issues, but you've taken control of your life, and some of that took privilege to take that control. I took control of my life, and I speak to other trans people today who are struggling, as you say, getting on pathways, getting affirmative. Hormone treatments, accessing surgery, accessing psychological safety and care, changing their ID, having a family that supports. There's a whole lot of things that I know I'm privileged. It wasn't easy. I had to work at it, but I think through some of my own lived experience and personal identity, I was able to take control of my life in the way that other people may not be able to. So, I certainly acknowledge I have a privilege, and Some of it may well be my historical assigned male at birth privilege, that I was socialized, I have a certain personality, and maybe that came from my history, and I haven't lost that. I freely admit that sometimes. So, yeah, it is a privilege to be able to take control of your life and change, because it's so easy for people to say, if you work hard enough, anyone can do anything, because that's bullshit as well, isn't it? It's not the case. Not everybody has the same starting point, and we've got to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And I believe that living out loud is paying it forward somehow, paying it
Mm,
forward, paying it back, because I recognize that you and I could not sit here and have this conversation 20 years ago, not even, you know? And that's not multiple lifetimes, that's one. It's not a whole life even. And I I now that I'm on the other side of the fear of being out, I recognize the value, because even though we can't control all the privilege and the things, what we can do is allow a lived experience that at least gives someone access to a story that turned out different. The thing that I did not have the privilege of access for at a very young age is the idea that you can be queer and okay. I learned from the media what it meant to be gay, and it meant you would be killed. The first trans person I ever saw on TV was murdered. And they now there are a lot of other stories told. There are a lot of other inputs. However, if they only get one, I really hope that it's people like us, right? Like that we, by exposing the parts of ourselves that we will allow, not right? Not like using who we are for some kind of marketing pitch. I don't mean it that way, but by at least like opening ourselves up to have conversations like this, by creating platforms where we allow
mm,
other trans people to have conversations like this, that truly we're we're using the privilege for good.
mm. Yeah,
And
no, yeah, I certainly agree with that, and I think, I mean, I've often described myself as professionally trans, and I think that's also a privilege. I don't have to pretend I'm not trans. I don't have to hide myself in thinking. Maybe when I'm in having a coffee, maybe when I'm in the supermarket, in the mall, or something like that, or the shopping centre, maybe then I don't want to be professionally trans. But in the day job, when I'm engaging with companies and doing my business, it's actually part of my superpower. They're hiring me because I am, not despite who I am. And I think also, if you don't mind me saying, by being out as non-binary using they them pronouns explicitly on your LinkedIn profile and your email footer and everything else, you're also saying, hey, I'm gender non-conforming, I'm trans, I'm non-binary. So you're not hiding in the shadow either by making that statement.
yeah, I tell people when I do this, when I talk about pronouns and I educate people, you'll laugh because I have this slide and I'll say, I am not a DEI expert. I am a human being that lives as a non binary and trans person in this world. And these are the stories I told the people I love. When the people I love asked me, how do I be better to you? This is what I told them. Because then my colleagues asked me, how do I be better to you? I call it my gay job and my day job. My day job is job postings, and I believe that they do add up to the same things. Every bit of work I do is because I want to help people imagine a new life. And whether that's a life in which they have a new job or they can be who they are, those are both worthy
Mm,
of the time and the work. And also because I know that education and me living out loud has consequences on bottom lines as well, on actual people's lives, I'm getting a little choked up because I'm thinking about this statistic that I always talk about. So, the Trevor Project did some research, and they say that every 45 seconds, a kid between the ages of 13 and 23 who's part of the LGBT community attempts suicide. And the thing that we don't talk enough about when we say attempts suicide is the questions they are asking themselves. And the questions they're asking themselves is, does it matter if I'm here?
yeah. Who would miss me? No, who would care?
And that's the hardest
Yeah.
question anyone can ask.
And that's the fundamental difference between being lonely and being alone, and how you see yourself, isn't it? If you believe you have no sense of belonging in anything, no one cares for you. What if I'm never no longer here? No one will care, and that is fundamentally, I think, the same story that most people who maybe survive an attempt would say. And often, if you can just say, "I care," let's talk, you matter. That is often what people want to hear, isn't it? That's the sad thing. I've had three people in my life who've taken their own life, and two of them I don't understand why. I don't understand why. Why did they think no one cared? Or their life wasn't worth anything. And I find it so hard because they were loved, and they're deeply missed. They're deeply missed. Um, my brother took his life accidentally, I think, when he was 18. Misadventure. He suffocated on butane in a bin liner. So I truly believe it was an accident. I don't believe he intended to take his life. I think he just fell asleep, passed out, and it was too late. He couldn't stop it. But yeah, you can never ask that question once they're gone, can you? Why or what? Especially when there's no note or no inclination. So yeah, no, I feel for what you just said there, and it's the work the Trevor Project does is amazing, and I think all LGBTQ charities around the world really do a valuable and worthwhile cause, trying to protect people and give people hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I just hope is so fleeting in this
Hmm.
world. It is I think it's something that we all are craving even more so over the last 2 years than we ever have. And I think it's more important than ever that it feels cliche to say, but I truly believe that my priority if in my living is that I can help other people figure out how we rely on each other because when you peel back all the layers, when you can put whatever topic you want on top, but the world gets to be a better place when we care a little bit more.
Hmm. It does. It does. Let's talk about your day job. We've talked extensively about both of our day jobs. Um, so talk to me about your job posting, because I think we did a webinar together. We've talked about this before, so I'd really like to just hear your perspective on where businesses make mistakes, or where people aren't thinking about enough about their recruitment marketing is effectively what we're talking about here. Their recruitment marketing, their offer. So where do people go wrong?
Well, I think a lot of people say, I want to stand out. I want to be best in class. That's a signature phrase for every business, but they don't actually do the thing. We want to be an inclusive organization, but the action behind it, the work isn't happening. And so many moons ago, I was a employer brand copywriter, and I realized that when it comes to hiring, there are just a million variables we don't control, but the one we can is how we ask, how we talk to people, how we describe work. And that if we create more openness and clarity around the work itself, we can actually create better access. That we can help someone have a better life. Because if you hate your job, you hate everything. There's very little going on in your life that's right if you specifically hate where you have to sit for 40 or more hours every single week, right? And so I spent the last five, in the same way that that pronoun presentation was created by stories and experiences with others, I also spent that time writing job postings and experiencing it with others. And truly, the best way to stand out was just by telling the truth. And I was like, telling the truth is what I do best. Like, I can do this. And that's what I've been doing is teaching people how to tell the truth in a way that's actually universal instead of just following rules that were completely made up. I'm realizing how much being who I am applies to my work every day as I'm explaining all of this. But truly, it's like telling the truth and not
Yeah,
following the rules is actually creating better outcomes for companies around the world.
yeah. I don't need to worry about what someone else is thinking about me. I can think how I think is right, and I can say that without looking over my shoulder. Of course I care if people like what I say, but I'm not worried about my job. I'm not worried about people not liking me because there are plenty of people who do like me, so it's not a problem. I work with a lot of organisations, and as you know, I work in kind of the TA recruitment space as well, around the D&I area. The biggest I constantly hear organisations say, "Well, it's so hard to find a black lawyer. It's so hard to find women in STEM. It's so hard to find people." And I'm thinking, you're just asking the wrong questions. You're fishing in the wrong ponds. You're not marketing, because there was one company that said it's so difficult to find a black lawyer these days in this specialty field. I said, well, if you were a black-owned firm specialising in this field, I'm sure you know where to find black lawyers who specialise in this work. So it's kind of like a football analogy. If you're not winning your games, change the manager, change the way you're doing things. If you keep doing the same things with the same people, you're going to get the same responses. So how do you tackle your recruitment marketing and the job postings to break those kind of myths and the way we've done things all the time?
So what I found is that they're actually using psychological tactics that are sending these people running. So we need to understand the like socialization of people, right? So there's a very small percentage of this world that's told they can do anything they want and shown over and over that they can do whatever they want and they can be successful. For the rest of us, we have something in our head that says, well, maybe that's not me. And what I found is that there were tactics that everyone uses that sends people running, and it triggers something deep inside of us. Let me give two examples. So, years of experience. Everyone uses years of experience. I need 15 years. But all you're saying is, I want someone 15 years older, because we know that spending time doing the exact same job, we don't do the same work. We're both consultants. We do wildly different work, but we both have 2 years of consulting experience. It doesn't work. It's inherently ageist, and it's the only way that most compensation teams know how to distribute people. And they'll be like, I want no experience. What you're saying is, I want someone young. It's cues. And you don't need to say, I want someone young. I can read between the lines. That's what I mean by the psychological piece. Here's the part that's really interesting is the requirements list, right? So when that list exceeds 1/3 visually of a page, we actually see fewer women apply by default, even if they have the exact same experience as the man sitting next to them. Fewer women will click apply on that job because they have the perception they could not possibly qualify. And so, what we've been able to do, and the work that I'm really proud of, is that everything we do is based in the DEI lens, in that we actually consider the psychological tactics to create the outcomes instead of just saying, like, don't say he, she, right? Like, that's the obvious crap. Like, I read a job post today that said he or she will. Like, it has to go beyond that. And so what we're doing is really teaching people how to describe experiences, because experience